I see a lot of familiar faces online, and I see a lot of new faces. So, to the people that I haven't met yet, maybe one day. Thanks again for the introduction, and I'm just going to um, share the screen now. There we go. Can everybody see that? I'm assuming that's a yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So here you see my beautiful face, a couple of years younger, and a few of my books on glutathione. These are pretty digestible. So even if you're not a scientist, they're relatively accessible, and certainly an exhaustive survey of what's been studied about this molecule. And for those of you who want to keep on top of what's happening in the world of glutathione research, please feel free to drop into the various sites you see here on the screen. Lots of info there that you'll probably find interesting. Certainly, reaching beyond the field of autism, you'll find out the rather broad reach that glutathione has on so many different health challenges.
Dr. Gutman, hello. Is there a link between glutathione and autism spectrum disorders? And if so, where can we find it?
A good opening question. When we think of good science and research, the website pubmed.gov is really the foremost source of articles available in the world. Now, a lot of people on this call today probably access PubMed on a regular basis. It's an essential tool for the sharing of scientific information. So for those of you that haven't heard of this site, it is a critical site to anyone doing research, but I got to warn you, it's a rabbit hole that you may end up spending hours or weeks or months out of your life. So here you see I've punched in a search with the two terms glutathione and autism. And the graphic here shows the amount of papers written in different years. And what's most noticeable is there really was nothing until around 2004. And then, boom, an avalanche of papers started being published. And why? Why all of a sudden? What happened in 2004? Well, this groundbreaking study was published. It came from a team led by Dr. Jill James, who many of you are well aware of, working out of Arkansas, of all places. This was exceptional news to everyone in the autism research community, entitled Metabolic Biomarkers of Increased Oxidative Stress and Impaired Methylation Capacity in Children with Autism. Now, a bit of a mouthful, but what they did was collect blood samples of both children with autism and those without, and compared them for a whole host of different biochemical markers or blood tests that related to a metabolic process called methylation. Again, I know some of you are familiar with these terms, but I want to be sure to keep parents and non-scientists in the loop here. And of course, oxidative stress, which is a reflection of the balance between antioxidants and free radicals. So this impossible to read table here, I don't expect you to read it, but what it shows are the results. And if you wanted to get into detail, remember pubmed.gov and enter the name of the study on the search window, and you can pull it up. But let me just give you the quick bottom line here. Just about 80% of the kids with autism had abnormalities in glutathione functioning. 80%. This is relevant information.
Before I go into that question, can I just ask something? That last slide, I think, was really powerful because it shows us an indication when you just understand some of the basic things here about just looking at the cysteine levels, compare the control children to the autistic children, that's quite a significant difference.
Absolutely.
And then we look at the oxidized and then the ratio between not only reduced glutathione, but oxidized glutathione. And I think this is a really fantastic study. And if you really want to get into the meat and potatoes of why these values are so important, then do, because this is that little I look at this and going, oh my goodness me, that is amazing. That's huge. This is a huge slide, Jimmy.
For sure. And this is why there was an explosion in subsequent research. A good point. And you must have very good eyes to read that on your screen.
I have my contacts out so I can see.
Okay.
So if that's the case, then let's look at glutathione, and in particular, what we're looking at here is autism, the function of that, and what is it, and why is it so important for the topic that we're talking about today, which is autism and the different spectrums of autism.
Of course. So for those of you who have glutathione as a new word to learn about, we could spend hours talking about glutathione. And of course, I've written many books on the topic. But for those of you who are new to this field, it's a molecule that occurs naturally in all of our cells. And the understanding of its many roles is expanding every year. Now, getting back to PubMed, you'll find over 180,000 articles on glutathione. Just to put this in context, if you enter vitamin C, you'll get back maybe 70,000 and 45,000 or so. Glutathione will get you more articles. There are more articles published on glutathione than vitamin C and vitamin E put together. So if anyone has not heard of glutathione before, it will become part of your regular language in due time. And so what does glutathione do for us?
Well,
sorry.
If we look at the chemistry, we won't look at the chemistry, but if you notice here what glutathione does, this is an acronym that was Dr. Jimmy did. And I think this is great. It's a great idea. And it's when we're looking at glutathione and how this product that we're talking about tonight, which is called Immunical, it is actually a food for your immune system. And it is the most important. It detoxifies. And that's going to be really important when we're looking at liver health and brain health when it comes to autism. Absolutely 100%. And then we're going to look at the critical energy sources that this can do to be able to help with brain function and body function, cellular function, because we know that glutathione is our master antioxidant. So how is it so important, and what is the bits in the chemistry kind of look at? It's going to get complicated, but if you can just get an overview when Dr. Jimmy explains this, this could be really cool, because I'm a sort of a junkie when it comes to this stuff. I love it, but it's not everybody's going to get it. But if you can get the overview, that's fantastic. Dr. Jimmy.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said. So yeah, let's dive in a little bit more. Now, these slides might be a little onerous, but Rav will post this video so you can go back and take your time looking at them. Now, in the next sequence of slides, originally I was going to get into several metabolic pathways where glutathione has a direct relevance to ASD, but I'll try to make it as brief as possible. You can download and freeze these frames later and read it at your own leisure. Let's just flash these overview slides onto your screen. You'll see that one pathway circled there where folate and vitamin B12 abnormalities relate to something called the MTHFR gene. Here is the transmethylation pathway. And here is a common endpoint, the transsulfuration pathway, which results in glutathione production. So take your time later on and look at these if you're into that. Those of you who need a hand walking yourself through it, you can access an older lecture I've done online where I go through all of this in more detail. Just make sure you pour yourself a nice coffee when you watch this link. It's at least an hour long. So yes, these are tough slides for most of us, but just to refine this down to simpler terms, glutathione is intimately related to methylation pathways. And glutathione is equally intimately related to the MTHFR gene, more importantly, this gene's dysfunction. Now, I may suggest that the parents of autistic kids, or if you're an older autism individual, invest in some relatively inexpensive genetic testing that can determine the MTHFR gene abnormalities. It absolutely blows my mind that these are available online for about $100. So this to a 68-year-old doctor here is still science fiction. Sorry to show my age. And number three, the blockages to glutathione production can be bypassed by the provision of bioavailable cysteine. In other words, the problem may lie in glutathione insufficiency. And all those pathways I showed you before, we might be able to get around these pathways that have abnormalities by jumping in the pathway at a later point with a dietary intervention. Yes, a dietary intervention where we supply bonded cysteine, and for this discussion, through the use of Immunical.
So
Now,
in other words, sorry, Dr. Gutman,
yeah.
I just want to say that, sorry to interrupt, but
No, please.
Can we also just, when we're looking back at this pathway here, we have to emphasize there's another product that Immunotech has that is very important for this pathway, and that is the booster in the green.
Yes.
Because it's going to supply us with the B vitamins that's going to make this pathway work.
Yes, both the B and the folate. And thank you for bringing that up. Now, it's not just any vitamin B or any folate. They have to be in their methylated form. So methylfolate and methylated B12. Thank you. That is absolutely missing from this presentation. I was just trying to lighten it up a bit.
I can't lighten it up, you know me.
No, but thank you for doing that.
No worries.
So, in other words, at the most basic level, a glutathione augmentation absolutely appears to be a critical intervention.
So, how do we raise glutathione, Dr. Jimmy?
Well, I know that you know the answer, and other people on this call know the answer, but most people don't know the answer. What's very important that I can't emphasize enough is that you can't raise glutathione by eating glutathione. When you eat glutathione, it becomes rapidly broken down in your digestive tract. In humans, mostly by an enzyme called GGT, which absolutely destroys glutathione. Glutathione is made within your cells. So the way to raise glutathione levels in the human body is to supply your cells with the building blocks, or what we call precursors. And here you see two books that every pharmacist and every doctor in Canada and the USA use. Although you have a different book in the UK, I think it's called MIMS. We may be in there soon, but these two reference books in there, when you're looking for a way to raise glutathione, these are books that contain all of the drugs that are available to be prescribed. But there's Immunical in there, a non-drug, but still listed in there. And so the two ways to raise glutathione that's listed in these books are the drug NAC and the natural protein called Immunical. Now, NAC is a wonderful drug, but it's not without problems. It has a certain toxicity, mostly gastrointestinal, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and it has what's called a short half-life. So you need to take it 3 or 4 times a day. And if you felt sick the first time you took it, you'll feel 4 times as sick by the end of the day. Immunical, on the other hand, has many other benefits, which we've have discussed in other calls, and you can look up online. And it doesn't make you feel sick, and it lasts. You can see the effect of Immunical even days after an ingestion.
What about the studies? Show me the meat and potatoes.
That's all that counts. With this knowledge of that way back then, I was compelled to start looking into this. But I had to do it cautiously. It hadn't yet been done using a protein precursor like Immunical. So I initiated this study, the oral tolerability of a cysteine-rich whey protein isolate. Of course, that's Immunical in autism. And it was a pilot study. It was a small study. But not only was it important to establish that the concept was sound and had the potential to be further investigated in larger studies, but there were challenges from the autism community itself about whether this was a safe idea. Now, let me explain. As most of you know, selected dietary restrictions seems to show benefits in these kids, and certain foods have been shown to be potentially problematic. And one foodstuff that was often eliminated in autistic kids that helped them was dairy or dairy products. Now, in my experience, many problems besides the obvious lactose intolerance surrounding dairy products lies in their casein content. Dairy products have casein. And casein is just one of the many subproteins that you could find in milk, and it represents the most common protein allergy in dairy. Now, I know this protein isolate very well, and I knew that it had the casein removed. And furthermore, I knew of some ASD individuals who are already taking the product for other reasons. Eventually, it was discovered why casein was problematic in ASD and other neurological issues. But we won't get into that today. So the small study was a success. The kids were trending positive, and the tolerance was excellent. The great thing is that small studies lead to larger studies. And so a fantastic group from Nova Southwestern University in Florida took to the task. Human studies in ASD are especially difficult. There are still no fully diagnostic biochemical endpoints. The etiology is variable. Kids obviously require a different level of consent, and so on and so on. We actually started this study 10 years before it was published.
You know, you had a slide before about the explosion of literature with glutathione, and everything is coming out that's new. So this is a recent study that you've got up here on this slide. This is significant. So tell us a bit about this, Dr. Gutman.
Well, here is the publication. It came out in 2021. It was led by Dr. Anna Castajon. And here, this excellent team from Nova Southwestern, which included members of the Mailman Siegel Center, a major autism research organization. This is a big player in the world of autism in the United States and in the world. Just a ton of work, well done. And you'll see in the title that this was a human study. It was randomized and double-blinded, placebo-controlled, and all the other features that represent a gold standard study, the kind of study that you can hang your hat on and feel comfortable recommending this to patients. And the intervention used was the glutathione precursor Immunical, best described as a cysteine-rich whey protein isolate. There you have it there. And this very busy slide, let me dumb it down, looked at the behavioral parameters that were measured. I'll get into that in a moment, but I urge the interested people on this call and the clinicians on this call to access that paper on PubMed. You see the ID number there at the top of the slide. So in this study, clearly glutathione levels were greatly improved with the use of Immunical. You'll see that in the green bars as opposed to the red bar, which represented the placebo group. So we fully expected this, but it's critical to document for statistical validation, and this was statistically significant. And finally, the question that is much more important to the clinician, to the parent, to the child, are they actually feeling and doing better? How has this affected their quality of living? Sometimes the pure scientist gets to focus on lab results, and the answer is yes. When we look at the measurements pertaining to skills of daily living, socialization, a reduction in maladaptive behaviors, these got better across the board. And what's also important to note that despite the efforts to randomize the kids into treatment and placebo groups, a close analysis of their behavior at the start of the study showed that the placebo group scored better than the treatment group. So this put a little bias in it against the Immunical. In other words, the treatment group showed better scoring at the end of the treatment. That would imply that the intervention was even better than the numbers show. Now, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. There seemed to be a subset of ASD kids that did much better than the overall population of autistic kids examined. This is important to tease out because since this is the first major study of its kind, it gives us information that perhaps there is a targeted group of autistic patients that may benefit much more from this strategy. Remember, ASD is a very heterogeneous phenomenon. There are many variations, and not every kid is the same. So, lack of a better term, we separated the groups into responders and non-responders, even though the so-called non-responders showed improvements. Look at the two tables. Overall, the kids improved in the areas in the blue lettered box, very promising. But look at the non-responders in the green lettered box. Look at the amounts of statistically relevant improvements in behavior parameters that resulted. Improvements in maladaptive behavior, communication skills, even gross motor skills. So this needs a closer look. What features were present in the group called responders? Two things. Number one, these kids were by and large older than the non-responders. Considering that the kids in the study were between the ages of 3 and 5, you can appreciate that 5-year-olds are dramatically different than 3-year-olds. And two, the responders had a higher baseline measurement of glutathione. They started off with higher glutathione levels before the intervention. And so how to make sense of these two facts? It may be possible that the physiology of these older kids, which has had 2 more years to evolve, these important developmental years is different. So the older kids are going to respond differently. Given that we looked at 3 to 5-year-olds, we clearly need to entertain a study looking at a broader age range. And the fact that the responders started out with higher glutathione levels is very relevant. Number one, maybe there's a threshold where glutathione levels need to be so these kids are functioning better. And that threshold was easier to reach with the dose that was supplied. And number two, which in my personal opinion has a strong likelihood, more kids have shown positive results if the dose in this study was increased. Given that the intervention was so well tolerated, and this has been on the market for over 25 years, it's not an unreasonable suggestion. So yes, I would like to see further studies, and I'm making a call out to those of you out there who have the means and skills to make a proposal. Now, I'm so optimistic about these results, and in my crystal ball, I see this as a viable and accepted tool in the future.
Do you know, Dr. Jimmy, I really love that study. It really brings out and asks a lot more questions about the basis of neuroplasticity in the brain as we get older as a young person. So in other words, neuroplasticity, for people who don't know that, is the ability for the brain to create new connections within the neurons based on the input coming in. So you can make that as an analogy of learning a sport and learning that sport and making new connections in the brain. So this is neuroplasticity, learning. And, you know, glutathione is such an important antioxidant that's in the brain to help with neuroplasticity. But I also just want to come back. I just want to bring in a couple of other issues that's not on this paper. This paper is fantastic. But tell me, Dr. Jimmy, do you think that omega-3 and the detoxification pathways of glutathione in the liver would assist in the higher levels of positive responding children to this study?
This is an absolutely brilliant question. And again, if we had the time to do a 2-hour lecture, I would have brought this in. And what Dr. McTavish is mentioning is omega-3, which again has positive studies in autistic spectrum disorder, and the fatty acids that make up omega-3 are not dissimilar to what the brain itself is made out of. Yeah. But what's even more interesting is the fact that you mentioned detoxification. So I'm going to get into a bit of a controversial area, and I'm not going to take a position. I'm just going to talk about what has been discussed and shown. There was and there still is a strong group of proponents that believe that vaccinations, multiple vaccinations, exposure to many vaccinations may be in part causing the increase in the prevalence of autism. I'm not going to comment on that, but I will say that it's probably not the vaccinations themselves much as it is the preservative that has been used in most of these vaccinations, a preservative that is now being phased out called thimerosal. Many of the vaccines contained thimerosal. What is thimerosal? Thimerosal is 40% mercury, and mercury is clearly an established neurotoxin. So if you're talking about an undeveloped brain of an infant, exposing that brain to mercury or any neurotoxin is potentially hazardous. Now, because Jill James's study showed that glutathione levels were low in 80% of these kids, well, we started out at the beginning talking about glutathione and detoxification. One of the things that is a primary detoxicant of mercury is glutathione. Glutathione detoxifies mercury. And if you have a young kid who's low in glutathione, who's exposed to mercury, makes them much more prone to the neurological damage from that exposure. Now, I wish we could just say there was just one reason for a kid to develop autism. There are probably several different pathways to get there, but one way definitely is environmental toxins, particularly neurotoxins, including heavy metals. So just a stupendous question. Thank you for asking that.
Well, it's good, and I just want to just sort of add on to that slightly. If people are not really they don't know about the toxicity of heavy metals, there used to be, I'm not sure if it's still on YouTube, but the University of Calgary published a video and showed how a snail's neuron, which was growing, reacted to a tiniest drop of mercury within the petri dish. And I think that's still on YouTube. And that's a fascinating look at what that heavy metal can do to a neural process in a snail. So have a look at that. It's a University of Calgary. I didn't want to put you on the spot, Dr. Jimmy, but I just thought that was an important thing because we know how much glutathione is so important in grabbing heavy metals and removing them from the cell, allowing the cell to function at its best level. And I know that your research in glutathione is extensive, and we could go now to the next slide, which is basically looking at your book, which I would encourage, if people don't have this, get it. I would say if you don't have it, then you don't have all the information. This is a really good Bible of glutathione, and Dr. Jimmy's put a lot of work into this, and this is the 5th generation. And because if you look at the earlier slide of how much information is coming out since 2004, is that the glutathione is exploding in terms of research. And this book is just going to go from the 5th to the 6th to the 7th, all the way, keep going. And the whole idea of this is to really give you a basic understanding of what glutathione is. It can be so complicated, as he says, but we can want to make it simple for everybody to understand, because not everybody has that brain to think about the scientific part of what glutathione does. It does so many things. And what we need to know is if we have lots of it, we're healthy. If we have a suboptimal amount, we have a health challenge of some sort. And if we have none, we're going to be in dire straits very quickly. What I wanted to do, Dr. Jimmy, I've got a patient, and she's also a dear friend of mine, Suzanne Shanley-Reed, on the call. I'm wondering if Raz, if you could bring her up, because she has an extraordinary story that she would like to just show people and tell people about, with her experience with Immunical and the effects on autistic children. Sue, are you there?
Yeah, please.
Hi, yes. Hi, yes, I am.
Hi, Sue. Can you just give us an indication about how Immunical helped your sons?
Okay, well, my son, we started noticing a problem with my son when he was about 2.5 years old. By the age of 5, we finally had him diagnosed as being autistic. He's actually classed as Asperger's, but they don't use Asperger's anymore. One of the things that we noticed with him was his challenging behaviour. He could be quite hard work. It caused massive problems within the family because I have other children. He would just go into a tantrum. He would throw things. Meal times were interesting because he refused to eat certain food. Think food had to be cut a certain way, had to be kept separate. It was just very challenging. I mean, I could just go on and on and on. When he was at school, he wouldn't sit with the other children. He wouldn't sit on the mat. He had to sit at a table. He had to be doing drawing. Although he was listening to the teacher, he just would not participate. And this went on all through school. I met Jeffrey, I think, in 2018, and Jeffrey mentioned Immunical to me. It did take me 6 months to decide to try it. I did my research. I tried it on myself first. When I put him on that, within 6 weeks, I had his teacher pull me to one side and ask me, what have I changed in my son? And the only thing that we had changed was putting him on Immunical once a day. And she just said his behavior in school is just different. He's participating in the classwork, he's joining in, he's calmer, he's just a total different child. The only problem I had with getting him to take Immunical was what I put it in, because he also had sensory stuff. And then I did find one thing, and then they stopped selling it. So I was back to square one. But he doesn't take it at the moment. He just it goes on and off it. But I want him to choose to take it, not me making him take it. He's now a teenager, but we have spoken recently, and I've asked him to agree to go on it for 3 months because I just want to prove to him the difference in him. He's struggling with school. School is a issue for him, the environment, the teachers understanding him. He's not scared to speak up now because he argues with everyone. But he has agreed to go on it. But I'm also looking at putting my younger son on it, who's far more complex. We haven't had a full diagnosis, but we keep being told there's traits of ADHD with my youngest, traits of autism, traits PDA. We know he's dyslexic. So I'm looking at putting him on it because he's far more complex and far more difficult to manage. So I'd be really interested to see the difference in them within 3 months.
That'll be very interesting, Sue, and thanks for that. I really appreciate that, for you sharing your story. It's important to know that this is a very complex and evolving condition that we're experiencing in this day and age, and we really need to find some basic elements that will help with the physiology of our body. And we know that glutathione is one of those major things that we need to have. The importance of that is paramount for everybody on this call and everybody that we know. But when it comes to certain conditions, certainly Dr. Jimmy knows all about this. He's co-written one of those papers that he put up there, but he didn't put that up there because his name was there. Naughty boy, you should put up there and take that accolade. Very well done, sir. And it's so important that we look at how we can help our physiology, and we're dealing with something that's a food. And as Dr. Jimmy had pointed out, this product is listed in the book of pharmaceutical products, but it's a natural product. And incidentally, it also holds a natural patent, I believe it is, in Canada. Is that correct, Dr. Jimmy?
Actually, it holds several patents. Of course, one for its ability to raise glutathione in the human being. Two, its ability to sustain a strong immune response. And there are other patents, including patent for its chemotherapeutic potential in cancer, in its use as in HIV/AIDS. So well documented highly researched and highly patented. Jeffrey, I have to thank you for adding so much color to this call, and pulling stuff out of me that I had not mentioned. So never apologize for putting me on the spot, because it's a good exercise for myself and for everybody to hear. So thank you so much. And Suzanne, thank you for your fascinating study. And Razvan, again, thank you for putting this call together. It's been just delightful.
I think the thanks should be from my side. I'm going to